Let you in on a little secret.
Oh. What's that secret?
It's 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Currently.
Mm-hmm. Revelation.
And I'm going to go ahead and tell you that for most platforms, 1080 is still sufficient. I'm going to die on that hill.
I can agree with that.
Would I want to shoot something that's going to be on a big screen in 1080? No. But what are most people, watching things on?
Yeah. I think the others for me are just attractive for flexibility with
regards to punching in and post,
things
right?
Like that, yeah.
Bigger proponent of trying to get it right in camera.
Yeah, definitely want to get it right in camera, but sometimes you
if you nail your composition in 1080, there's no need to punch. But
maybe one day I'll be good enough to not have to punch. Ever.
It's just listen. I'm just trying to keep somebody from succumbing to gas. We've got cameras coming out that I think shoot like 32K and
Blackmagic legitimately just released an 18K sensor, I believe.
18K.
And then the Ursa 12K has been out for a while now. So
yeah,
we're getting there.
Canon's thrown 8K.
Yeah, people are just slinging Ks around now.
All that to say,
you get a K.
Yeah, it's
everybody
like the Oprah
gets a K.
situation,
it's Oprah.
Right? All that to say, I think 1080 is still sufficient. Let you in on another little secret. We're shooting this in 1080.
Yes, and then upscaling it to 4K.
Yeah, it comes out in 4K, but to save on data,
she's getting upscaled.
All those things, it's 1080.
She's getting upscaled. Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you find yourself in
life,
your walk of life. We appreciate you listening or watching.
Whatever you're doing,
wherever you're doing it.
Whether you're a faither or a framer.
Hopefully a faither.
If not, I'd like to talk to you.
Absolutely. We got some good news. Hey, so one thing that we do we started in photo. We then transitioned into a hybrid and still to this day are a hybrid media entity. We still do photo. Actually, it's probably 50-50. We do a lot of photo. We do a lot of video. Yeah. So
most jobs that we do include both.
Yeah. We like to include that as a deliverable. I say all that to say, one thing we want to discuss today is mistakes that I not only see photographers make when they make the jump to video. Also, we made a lot of these mistakes.
All of them, multiple times.
When we transition into video, but we also have people come to us who are photographers and they're like, hey, I want to start using a little bit of video, something more than my cell phone. Need to know what differences or what mistakes to possibly...
What are my settings?
Avoid. Yes. So that's what we're going to talk about.
What are my settings?
Camera settings that we notice, and oftentimes photographers get wrong regarding video.
I'm going to coin this term. We're going to give you some settings that will set you up for success with video.
Interesting.
How'd you like that?
I do like that.
Before we talk about those, let's talk about today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than us, Motion Creative Media, Jared and Garrett, and our Blue Collar LUT. Folks, our Blue Collar LUT, which is free to you, is a drag and drop, plug and play filter, basically, for your footage, whether that be cell phone footage, camera footage. We've designed this to be pretty flexible with everything. You can download that down in the description below. Jared, thanks for sponsoring this episode.
Hey, thank you.
He's over there cell phoning. Meat and taters. Get us in the meat and taters, Jared. We're talking camera settings that will set you up for success with video.
Yeah. So I'll say this. You still have the same exact variables within the exposure triangle as tools within your toolkit.
ISO, shutter speed.
Aperture.
There it is.
F-stops, whatever you want to call it. Those are still the three things that you're going to use in video. So that doesn't change. However, there are some rules, and I'm not necessarily a huge proponent of rules, right? That they're okay.
I don't know. You're a rule follower.
I am to a degree, but I also understand that, there are photography rules.
That are meant to be broken.
Yeah. Who says you can't break that compositional rule?
Some are blatantly to be ignored.
So all that to say, there are some guidelines that are very heavily encouraged for you to follow with regarding the exposure triangle.
Hit me with one.
So the first one, I think is the main one that people mess up when they move to video. Shutter speed. Shutter speed. Because with photo, even if you're in full manual, a lot of people are going to go ahead and set their ISO.
Yep.
They're probably going to go ahead and set their aperture. So as the scene changes, as they're moving around this mountainside or whatever, taking portraits, the variable that they're going to be...
They're rocking the shutter.
They're going to be changing the
Or
shutter.
if they're an aperture priority, the camera's rocking the shutter.
That's the variable that's changing. However, that is a variable that you generally do not want to change with video.
No, it has to stay constant. And I'll give you a little backstory on why this is. If we talk about industry standards when it comes to cinema, movies, films, TV, there are set shutter speeds for your frame rates that you're shooting in.
Those are different.
Those
can often get confused.
They can be. But there is a rule out there called the 180-degree shutter rule when it comes to video, which states,
in layman's terms,
that your shutter speed needs to be double whatever the frame rate is that you're shooting.
Right.
For example, if I'm shooting 24 frames, my shutter speed needs to stay at 1/48 or 1/50, whatever's the closest that you can get to double.
Yep.
If I'm in 30, shutter speed needs to be 60. If I'm shooting in 60 frames, shutter speed needs to be 120, so on and so forth. You just double your frame rates with your shutter speed.
And the reason for that is because motion blur.
Yes.
There is a pleasing, and it's mostly just because we've been conditioned.
Right, we've been conditioned by Hollywood.
By movie, TV, all those things.
And film cameras, which I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole.
But you want some natural looking motion blur. And I think what we should do here is attempt to throw some B-roll here so that we can explain
Flash some
the
clips.
fact. Yes. So the reason why you want, and we're shooting these in 24 frames a second, 23.98.
With a 180-degree shutter.
Because our cameras shoot shutter angle. But if they didn't, we would shoot shutter speed and we would make it to the closest, which in most cases is going to be that 1/50.
Yep.
The reason for that is because when your hand moves or when movement occurs in the object or in the frame, if you're John Cena, which you can't see him, so that's probably a terrible explanation. I do know that about wrestling. But you're going to want this natural motion blur. For instance, if you did not pay attention to your shutter speed and you just look at the exposure and you're like, oh, I need to have a higher shutter speed so that I can achieve a proper exposure. Well, within video, what that's going to do is it's going to look really choppy.
Yes,
and we'll show that here in this clip.
It's going to look somewhat hyper realistic.
Yes,
like you're playing a video game or something.
Like you're playing a video game, and so shutter speed is the biggest thing that I see most people get wrong. Whatever frame rate, which is your frames per second, we'll talk about that in a minute. Whatever frame rate you're shooting, make sure that your shutter speed is double that. Now,
double bubble.
Here's what brings you into the next situation. In indoor settings, you're not going to need, in most cases, neutral density.
Right.
You're not going to need sunglasses
for your camera.
You're going to be okay to rock 1/50 on your exposure. Now,
and you can adjust with aperture if need be.
And you can adjust with aperture if need be because you do still have that variable at your disposal. Now, outdoors.
This is where it gets tricky.
Different situation. You're going to go out there and you're going to say, well, I would love to shoot my lens at 2.8. I would love this shallow depth of field.
I paid for a 2.8. By golly, I'm going to use every single one.
I'm going to shoot at 2.8. So you go out there and you set up a shot and you realize, oh,
my image is pure white.
It is way overexposed. And I'm already at a really low ISO. So like I need to change my shutter speed. Well, in photo mode, that's exactly what you would do.
Right.
But what you need to do is keep 1/50 or double whatever you're shooting. And you need a variable ND.
Neutral density. It's just sunglasses for your lens.
Yeah, they go on the front of your lens in most cases. And they're going to change intensity as you twist.
And we can flash a clip of that as well.
Yeah. So that is how you still keep your 180-degree shutter, which is double.
Double your frame rate.
Maintain a proper exposure within video outside.
And keep the aperture that you want.
Yeah.
Alternatively to that, if you don't own ND filters and you do want to adjust your aperture, just understand that you're not going to be able to shoot it wide open at f2.8. You might have to crank it on down to f11 or f16 or f22, whatever your lens goes to.
Which, I'll be honest with you, I would rather see a properly exposed image with pixel, end-to-end sharpness at f16 as opposed to a blown image.
Yes.
Right?
Or an image where we've had to crank the shutter because we didn't have an ND and we absolutely refused to close our lens down.
Yeah. So keep your shutter speed at double your frame rate. Ways to do that outside. You're going to need an ND filter.
ND filter, possibly aperture.
Possibly an aperture. Those are your two options.
And if you want some ND recommendations, let us know down in the comments below. We can certainly recommend a few to you.
Yeah, there's some expensive ones, and there's some pretty affordable ones that we have had very good.
And they all do the trick.
Yeah, they all do the trick.
They all do the trick. So you mentioned a pretty good point, and this will move us into setting number 2. We talked about shutter speed, but a closely related relative to shutter speed would be our frame rates.
Yeah,
because shutter speed
often
and frame
confused.
rates. Yeah,
it's confusing.
Often confused. I would say they're cousins. They're not brother and sister.
Yeah.
They're cousins because they both have to work in conjunction with each other.
Yes,
to make this happy family of exposure work.
So most situations you're going to want to shoot in 24 frames per second. If it is a talking bit,
industry standard.
That just means every second that's recorded, there's 24 frames written and captured.
You mean like motion pictures?
Yeah.
Who would have guessed it?
So a lot of people get this wrong, and I did when I started out too, because what I would do is like I would even on my iPhone, I would see, this shoots 60 FPS or this shoots 120 FPS.
Well, it automatically goes to 60 frames when you open up your video.
This is going to be
the
better.
best.
It's better. It's a better video setting. That's not really true. So
Not
for instance, the rule that you can break if you desire, but I would suggest following is if it's not going to be slowed down, meaning if you're not going to make this clip slow motion in post-production when you're editing it or putting it together in a reel, whatever, probably need to shoot it in what we call real time, which
24
is
frames a second.
23.98 or 24 frames per second.
Or if you're a broadcast crew, 30 frames because that's
maybe
broadcast
30.
TV. Yeah.
I don't like 30. 30's
I don't
kind
like
of
30.
30's kind of icky to me.
I use 30 if I want to emulate 24 but slow down just a little bit.
Yes.
That's the only time I use 30.
So most of the time when you're editing, if you're editing in an NLE, you're going to have a timeline setting. And this may be further than we meant to get into.
i.e. Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve, Final Cut, whatever your editing is.
Your timeline setting is normally going to be 24 frames per second. So that means if you have a 60 frame per second clip that you're putting in there, you can slow that clip down 40%. All the way to 40%.
And if you don't, it's going to look kind of choppy.
And it would still be smooth.
Right.
Now, the frame rate, again, plays along with your shutter speed. You're still going to want motion blur.
Yeah.
Even in your slow-mo clip. So again, that goes back to the 180. But as a general rule of thumb, if you are just talking to the camera or if you're just filming an interview or you're not going to slow the clip down
like
and make
we're
it
doing right now.
Dreamy, 24 frames per second.
Yes.
That's what you're going to want to do.
Industry standard.
Yes. From
Industry
cinema.
Standard. You have 24 frames, 30 frames, 60, and 120.
And maybe we could even show here like what this same clip looks like in 60.
Ooh.
You're going to notice it's like...
Again, it looks hyper realistic.
It
it's
does.
Like a video
the
game.
movement is there's physically more frames.
Right.
So
you have 60 frames in 1 second versus 24. So you have less motion blur.
Yes.
It looks more hyper realistic. And a lot, again, the example that I always go to is a lot of video game streamers. You know, they'll stream in 60 frames or even 120 FPS.
You want that hyper realistic.
They want that hyper realistic. That's what the video game look is. In cinema though, and in video, typically we want everything to point back to 24 frames.
Well, I mean, I think 24 frames, not only was it, just kind of how everything started with cinema, but it's also, I think, very closely realistic to how your eye
I believe so.
sees.
I believe so.
If you're not seeing every frame of me, moving my hand through this discussion that we're having, there's motion blur. And so it just feels more natural for a plethora of reasons. So yeah,
Agreed.
frame rates. If you're not going to slow it down, shoot it at 24.
Yeah. Cousin to shutter speed. Don't get them confused.
Or perhaps if you are overseas, 25 frames
25 frames a second.
PAL, something like that.
Yeah, the PAL system.
So the other variable that you have, and we're not going to spend a whole lot of time because you can really get nerdy with this.
Yes. If we're not already nerdy on this episode.
The other variable allowed to you is ISO, right? The other part of the exposure triangle.
The sensitivity of your sensor.
As a rule, no different than photo, you're going to want to shoot the lowest ISO that you can to achieve the exposure that you want.
Yes.
Or that you need. Now, there are differences here that we could really get into the weeds with, but if you're shooting log, your ISO's values are going to be different than if you're shooting
standard picture profile.
And so what we mean by that is like with Canon, if you're literally just shooting their standard profile or their portrait profile or their landscape profile, whatever, those ISO values are going to be different than if you're shooting log. Now, we didn't start shooting log.
Right.
Actually, I take that back. We did start shooting log because we were told we need to.
Yeah, we shot log improperly.
We way underexposed it. And maybe we can drop the LUT here, or we can drop our color grade and show you what log actually looks like.
Pretty ugly.
Log is not raw.
It's a hybrid.
But it is flat.
Yeah, it's a hybrid between standard profile and raw.
And so where we messed up when we first went to log was we were making contrast in camera on the back of our LCD because it is a flatter image. The only way we could introduce the contrast that we thought we needed was to, in turn, underexpose the image.
Which is typically what you do in a standard picture profile. You either expose it a little under or right at even exposure. With log, typically modern day cameras like to be exposed a little hot whenever they're in log.
ETTR, exposed to the right.
Yes.
So I say all that to say you need to research your camera.
Because manufacturers differ.
And see what they call their base or their native ISO. At those values, it is going to be the cleanest image. And what I mean by clean is you're not going to introduce noise.
Digital noise.
Digital noise, which in video is a lot harder to remove than it is in photo, especially if you're shooting raw photo.
Yeah, well, because with photos, I mean, and I know you're a big proponent of this, you like to keep your shutter no less than like 1/250th.
Yeah.
Basically at all times.
Yeah.
Which means if we're in a dimmer situation, there's times where you might be at 3200 ISO, you might be at 4000, because in photo, it's going to be a little bit cleaner in general because you're shooting raw. But you can clean it up with noise reduction in Lightroom, Photoshop, whatever you're using. Video's a little different. Video, to reduce noise in video, you have to have a pretty powerful machine because it's very labor intensive on your computer. So playback may not be as smooth in your editor, but it gets
tough. Muddy quick.
Yeah, it gets very muddy, and
the
digital noise. Yeah, digital noise is not as pleasing as like what we're used to with like film grain.
Yeah,
a lot of people like film grain.
Yeah,
grain and noise are two different things.
Which, on the photo side, I find that a little bit of noise kind of more so emulates grain.
In photos, yes.
In photos.
Yeah. In video,
no. It's not. It's
just
these annoying specks in the shadows
purples
that you
and
see,
greens.
and you're like, what is that?
That's just purple and green blocks, basically.
Yes.
Very ugly.
So I say all that to say, research your camera. For instance, we shoot most of these podcasts on our Lumix S5 IIs. We shoot in Vlog, which is their log profile.
Their log profile.
There are two base ISOs, in which case you are going to have a very, very, very clean image. It's 640
and 4000.
And the next one is 4000. So does that mean that we couldn't shoot log in those in-between values?
You can.
You can.
You're just going to get more noise.
You're going to, it's not going to be as clean.
Yeah, as you raise your exposure until you get to the second base.
And so why would you ever shoot at 4000 if you just told me I need to shoot the lowest possible? Well, in a low light scenario, you've got your lens wide open, 2.8, 1.4, whatever it is.
And you still need to get proper exposure.
And you still need light. You don't have your ND on there.
And you don't have exterior lights that you can bring in.
Yeah. So what you've got to do is
you're just using available light.
You're going to use that available light. So like, for instance, in the gym that we shoot at a lot of times, Star Fitness, it's a darker facility because the lights are so far away from the subjects. There's a really high ceiling.
And sometimes for effect, we shut some of them off.
We shut some of them off. So we are constantly bumping up to 4000 ISO. But again, every manufacturer is different. I know with a lot of the Sonys, I think the base is 800 and then it bumps up to literally 12,800. Canons are different. Like, so just research
your manufacturer.
And if you're not going to shoot log, research it even further in the sense of their
standard profile.
And standard profile, what is the cleanest ISO setting?
And I would say if you can't find that information, maybe you're shooting on an older DSLR, a safe bet if you're not in log, anywhere between 100 and 400 ISO.
Yeah, if you can get by with that, for sure, you're going to have a clean image.
And if you can shoot log, anywhere between 400 and 800.
Yeah.
Probably safe ISOs for most manufacturers, if you have an older camera.
And I guess another thing to say on that is your standard picture profiles are going to be already a Rec 709 color space.
Yeah.
Which
they're already going to have colors, contrast, everything.
Yes, much closer to a finished product
than log.
I don't want to really confuse the two, but it's almost likened to
JPEG and RAW.
It's almost likened to JPEG and RAW, but log is not RAW.
Right.
There is RAW video.
Right.
Cinema cameras often shoot it. That's a completely different beast. But basically, if you were shooting log, you're going to have more flexibility in post.
Yeah.
But you also have to convert that into a Rec 709 color space.
Which, again, is industry standard.
Industry standard.
For video.
So, that was more than I wanted to say on ISO.
Yeah, hopefully that wasn't like too weedy.
If it was, please reach out and we can clarify.
Yeah. These are things that are important to know, because if not, again, the same mistakes that we made for a very long time, you may make as well, and I would like to mitigate that for you if possible.
Yeah, I would love to help you avoid a mistake or multiple mistakes.
Yep.
So if you don't have any more aperture, you can't raise your ISO without introducing a bunch of noise. You got one of two choices. You can either embrace the noise, or you find a different spot to shoot,
or bring in more lights,
bring in lights. If you don't own lights, find a window.
Yeah, find a window.
Don't shoot into the window,
right?
But use it as a nice soft,
as a light source,
key light. So the other thing, and I think this is a good transition, is something that we messed up for a while, and I can think of a few weddings where we messed this up, and it now haunts me. White balance.
Oh, I can think of a dad burn automotive shoot that we did. It was blatantly obvious that I was in auto white balance.
Auto white balance, if you're shooting photos and you're shooting raw, not the end of the world.
Right.
Not the end of the world. I would still suggest setting a custom white balance.
Yeah.
Learn
just
your
for
kelvins.
consistency.
You're gonna get better results that way.
For consistency purposes.
Hate yourself less in post-production, all those things. But with video, you do not want to shoot auto white balance.
Why is that, Jared? Why don't we want our camera just doing it for us on the fly?
You could probably get by with it on a talking head situation if the frame doesn't change much. But if the lighting changes, like the sun comes in and out or something behind a cloud, your white balance is going to shift.
And you're going to see that in the finished product.
You're going to see that. You do not want your white balance shifting either the Kelvin or the tint.
Right.
Because that's the two variables you have.
Mid-roll.
Middle of the shot.
Yeah. That's amateur hour through and through. And again, I can say that because I've done it.
Yes,
many times.
We've done it. The camera, we didn't understand what Kelvins were.
Right.
We didn't understand that the why that was even a setting. Like, why do I need to set?
And then when I get it in the editor, I'm like, why the heck is my footage changing colors?
Why did this become pink all of a sudden?
Yeah, in the middle of the shoot.
Yeah. So set a custom white balance. We have an app that we have used. Well, not since day one, because day one we made mistakes.
I was going to say day one we didn't have it, and I wish I did.
Day two, since day two, basically, whatever that means to you, we have used religiously LSP Evo, and you'll eventually get to the point of
you can eyeball things.
You'll be able to eyeball things. Yeah. But until then, use this app, LSP Evo. I don't even remember if it's paid or if it was free.
I think it's $2.99.
Worth every penny.
Yeah, worth all 299 pennies.
Worth every penny. We'll show you here a clip of how this app operates.
It basically tells you exactly where to set your white balance.
Yeah, but I'm going to show you here, like as you pan.
Yeah, it'll change it.
Notice that it's changing. So what that tells you is if you were to pan with your camera, guess what it's going to do if it's an auto white balance? It's going to shift.
It's going to shift.
And sometimes it's smooth enough to where you don't notice it.
Ish.
Just avoid it.
Well,
set yourself a custom. You will love yourself a lot more in post-production.
Set yourself a custom, and most modern cameras nowadays, you can set a custom white balance in camera. Like you can pull up custom white balance. It'll have you take a picture of an area.
Yeah.
And that area should probably be either white or gray or some neutral color, but it will set you a custom balance and it will stay there.
Yeah.
If you don't want to use your phone or whatever, most modern cameras, they have custom white balance that you can set. So.
And here's something that a lot of people may not understand or they may get wrong with regards to white balance. Even if you set a custom white balance, you may already have in mind, like for instance, we shoot most of our star content a little on the cooler side.
For their look.
We record it clean though. Mm-hmm. We do that color shift in post-production.
In post-production, yeah.
It would be the same as you saying, oh, I'm pretty sure I'm already going to color this cooler.
Right.
Or I'm gonna have this finished product look cooler or look warmer. I would caution you, don't bake that in to your footage.
Shoot it as clean as you can.
Yeah, shoot it neutral.
Yeah.
With regards to your white balance.
Mostly too for skin tones.
There's where you're going to notice your shift. Now again,
a lot of your skin tones, they'll shift if you don't have the right white balance in camera.
A lot of times in post-production, when we are in the color grading process, we will fall one way or the other to invoke a feel.
Right.
But again, you're going to want to start with a base, a clean, white, neutral base.
Yes.
And then you can shift it in post. So LSP Evo is going to be your best friend.
Yes.
And all that means is it's going to tell you the Kelvin, the true white balance of that scene. And you may say, but this shifts in this scene. Well, a lot of times we will split the difference.
Yeah. Find a happy medium.
Find a happy median. If
you're within that range, you're good.
You're going to be good.
Yeah.
So set yourself a custom Kelvin white balance, and you will hate yourself a lot less.
Do not use auto white balance in video.
White balance.
You're welcome.
It's not going to work out well for you.
That may be the secret best tip of the day, honestly. You can screw up everything else, and that's fine and dandy. Your footage, it will be okay to a degree. But auto white balance, whenever I see that, I go back and I have terrible dreams about that from the past.
Well, so like even if you're just using your iPhone.
Yeah. Set a white balance on your iPhone.
Well, you can
lock the white balance.
You can lock it, right? By
hold down the screen.
Not just tapping for focus.
Hold it for
a couple seconds, and you'll notice AEW or something pops
AEL
up or something like
or AWL, something like that.
So it locks that white balance.
Also locks your exposure.
So yeah.
Set it and forget it.
Please avoid auto white balance.
By all means.
That's like that and shutter speed are one of the two, like, to someone who knows something about video, those are like the two standout, like
amateur hour moves.
Yeah, it's like,
and again, we can say that because we've done it.
We did
many times.
And I'm like taking a Brad Paisley page, right? If I could write a letter to me,
custom white balance.
Learn what white balance is.
Yes.
Learn the 180-degree shutter rule.
Yes.
Don't shoot talking bits in 60 frames per second.
Correct.
I've made these mistakes.
Very recently, too. Accidentally, but very recently.
Yeah. So I guess to play devil's advocate on the slowdown situation and the frame rate situation, you can't slow down 24 frames per second.
No, you can't.
So it's one of those.
Don't attempt it.
Don't attempt it. It will. It'll be juddery.
Unless that's a vibe you're going for.
The frames don't exist.
Unless that's a mood you're trying to sell.
I think maybe as a bonus, most people as they start out are going to be shooting in. They're either going to make the mistake that we did and underexpose their log image, or they're going to be shooting in a standard picture profile.
Yes.
Let's just assume, because that is the easiest.
Yeah.
It's way less intensive on post-production.
Yeah, less work.
Less editing. Let's assume that people are shooting standard picture profile.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think you should for a while until you understand log.
Yeah. Dabble in it,
yes. But until you like truly understand it, be careful taking dollars for it.
You can save yourself a lot of heartache.
Yeah.
If you just shoot in standard.
Yeah.
So the biggest thing with regards to standard picture profile kind of likens to a JPEG. There's physically less data.
Less information.
There's less information. There's less information from exposure values. There's less information from a color value standpoint. So you need to be very, very, very mindful of your exposures.
Yeah, of your settings.
if you overexpose it,
It's gone.
you're not going to get that back.
Right.
You have more flexibility with log, but if in standard picture profile, you really, really, really need to be mindful of your exposure values. And that goes on the bottom end too. Like on your shadow side, there's no detail there
if it's black.
If you didn't capture it.
Yeah, if you go pure black.
So the biggest thing I would say is if you're shooting someone, some of the older cameras don't have the best dynamic range in standard picture profiles, but
which means they don't capture all of your highlight and shadow and midtone detail as good as others.
Here's what you need to do though. If you're filming a subject,
let's just say we're doing an interview.
You got to nail their skin tone.
Yeah.
And let the other values fall where they may.
Yeah, they're just going to have to go.
They're going to have, and if that means clipped highlights, blown highlights, in lieu of a properly exposed subject, that's better than.
It's better than having your subject underexposed. I actually saw somebody had posted in a forum earlier today, and they had actually underexposed the image, and they're like, "This image is so underexposed right now that when I bring it back up," or they're like, "This image is so noisy whenever I try to raise exposure," and like
I saw that it was like 4 stops under.
Yeah, like dude, you exposed it basically almost pure black on the skin tones.
Yeah,
on the skin.
Yeah.
And so like that's the opposite end of the spectrum of the example that you just gave, but it's the same concept. If we lose the whites or if we lose the blacks, they're gone.
Yeah.
And you're not getting it back. And if you do try to get it back, you're in trouble as far as noise goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would agree with that. Typically, we want to expose for the subject because that is the important part of your frame. If you're doing an interview, let the rest fall where it may. If you're in a standard picture profile, I want my subject to be properly exposed. But
one thing you can do too, it may be a very simple compositional change. Let's say you're shooting an interview of someone in their home and you just need a quick little thing. So you've shot it in standard picture profile. You don't want to spend a whole lot of time editing. Great. There's no problem with that.
Right.
But change your composition. For instance, like don't shoot the massive bay window in your frame.
With them backlit.
Because here's the thing, like most cameras that are affordable or attainable.
Or older.
They're not going to have the dynamic range.
They can't keep that window if you're not bringing in more light.
They're not. So just maybe don't have that in your frame.
Or have a piece of it to motivate your light, whatever.
So there are ways for you to even mask that your camera is older or doesn't have the dynamic range of, say, a Hollywood cinema camera.
Right.
Which, newsflash, it doesn't.
Correct. Correct. In most cases, yes.
Most cases, even with the cameras that we use, we often have to pick. Or
bring in more light.
Try to bring in more light. So,
which gets expensive.
So, yes, be mindful of your exposure. Get it as right as possible in camera.
And again, this is going to be something specific to whether you're shooting standard profile or log footage.
Yes.
I think for anyone, it's a good idea to go do some research on how should I expose, my standard picture profile. Let's say I'm shooting Sony.
Yeah.
How should I expose Sony standard picture profile?
Right.
How should I expose, whatever their other profiles are?
Oh yeah, I'm not that familiar with the Sony line.
Yeah, I know. With Lumix, we have standard, we have L Classic Neo, we have landscape, portrait, natural.
Yeah, natural's a good one.
Things like that. So anyways, learn your camera brands, specific profiles, and how to expose those properly if you're not shooting log.
Yeah. Hopefully this clears up a little bit. I actually have a fear that we have possibly made more confusion.
Maybe.
And if that is the case,
reach
out.
Let
Leave us a comment
below.
and say, hey, you mentioned this. I'm struggling with this concept.
Yeah. Would
love to dive a little further. We've tried to keep most of the stuff surface level without getting into the weeds, but like video is different than photo.
It is different.
You're using the same cameras, and at the end of the day, you are still capturing images.
You're capturing images. You just have a lot less flexibility with what you can change because there are some set standards that we practice in video.
Yeah.
With your shutter speed, frame rates, things like that. But if you do have questions or if you do hate us and we've given you terrible information, leave those in the comments below. We'll try to clear up anything that we can.
So one thing that we maybe got a little too in the weeds on, but I know there's a lot more that we could discuss, was in the editing suite.
Yes.
We use DaVinci.
Yeah.
If you would like an explanation of this timeline frame rate, because it can get kind of confusing, right? Wait, I've shot a frame rate, but my timeline's a different frame rate. My project's a different frame rate.
And everything looks choppy.
we would
can
love, we can make a video on that if that's something you would like to see a little more of.
Yeah,
I
let us know that in
know.
the comments below.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have any questions, please reach out.
Yeah.
We had a question on one of our earlier podcast episodes. Somebody was asking, and I did not anticipate this because it's a pretty simple setup to us, but they wanted to know how we set up our light.
Yep.
How we color graded our podcast. So we're going to make a video about that.
Future video coming.
Jared,
there's also some other things that our audience can leave for us. What would those be?
Reviews.
Stars and bars.
Yeah.
Stars and bars.
Rate us.
Review us. Good or bad. We read them all.
In the event that you happen to know a photographer who is maybe thinking about dabbling in video.
Send them this video.
Perhaps this could be...
Or send them this podcast.
Some sort of help. To them.
Absolutely.
Other than that, I mean, video settings that camera videographers...
That photographers...
Goodness gracious.
Camera settings that photographers get wrong with video.
Yes.
On that note, Jared, here's the hard part.
And we will catch you guys in the next one.
He didn't make that very hard. Y'all have a good one.